When I woke up, my throat felt dry, and every part of my body seemed heavy. I tried to move my fingers, but even that took effort. The machines around me made quiet sounds. I looked toward the door, expecting someone familiar to walk in. Nobody came. Mara noticed my eyes were open and immediately stood beside me. She pressed the nurse button and told me not to speak too much. I wanted answers, but my mind was still cloudy. A few minutes later, a nurse entered and checked my condition. She smiled when she saw me awake, but I could tell something was wrong by the way she looked at Mara. I whispered, "My parents." Mara paused before answering. "They were here earlier," she said carefully, "but they left several days ago." "Ils here." Why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up the folded note from the table and placed it in my hand. My fingers shook as I opened it again. The handwriting belonged to my mother. There were only a few paragraphs, but each sentence felt like a knife. She wrote that they had spent enough money on me. She said they were tired of dealing with my problems and could no longer keep putting their lives on hold. She told me not to contact them after leaving the hospital. At the bottom, she wrote that I was no longer part of their family. I read it twice, then a third time. I couldn't understand how my mother could write those words while I was lying unconscious, fighting to stay alive. Mara sat beside me. "You don't have to deal with everything today," she said. I turned my face toward the window. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't even find the strength. For years, I had believed that being useful was the same thing as being loved. Whenever my parents needed help, I was there. If they needed money, I found a way. If something went wrong at home, I fixed it. Calloway never had to do those things. My parents always protected him. I had accepted that because I believed families were complicated. But this was different. They had walked away when I was at my weakest. Mara later explained that my parents had removed several of my belongings from their house. They had also told the hospital they would not handle my future expenses. That information hurt almost as much as the note. Then Mara mentioned something that made me stop thinking about my parents for a moment. She said someone had been asking questions about my financial records while I was unconscious. I looked at her. "Who?" She said she wasn't sure yet, but she promised to find out. I closed my eyes and thought about the financial project I had been working on before the accident. It was something I had kept private, something my parents knew almost nothing about. And suddenly, I wondered if keeping it secret had saved me from losing much more than their love. Over the next few days, my strength slowly returned. I could sit up longer, eat without feeling sick, and walk a few steps with help. But my mind was still trapped in questions. Mara visited me every morning. One morning, she brought a thick folder and placed it on the table. "These are the records we were able to collect," she said. I opened it carefully. The first pages showed the dates my parents had visited the hospital. They had come often during the first few days after my accident. Then their visits became shorter. After that, they stopped completely. I felt a strange emptiness inside me. I turned another page. There were notes about questions my parents had asked the hospital staff. Had I shown signs of recovery? Could I make financial decisions? Who would control my accounts if I could not? Could someone else access my property? I stared at those questions for a long time. They weren't asking how much pain I was in. They weren't asking whether I could walk again. They were asking what would happen to my money. Mara then showed me the visitor list. One name stood out, Brena Vali. I didn't recognize it. "Who is she?" I asked. Mara explained that Brenna was a financial advisor. She had met with my parents shortly before they stopped coming to the hospital. My stomach tightened. I had never hired a financial advisor named Brenna Vale. I turned through the papers again. Then I saw something that made my hands go cold. My parents had tried to get information about my life insurance through my employer. They had also asked about my retirement account. I looked at Mara. Why would they need that? She didn't answer immediately. I already knew the question I was afraid to ask. Did they think I was going to die? Mara looked down at the folder. "I don't know what they believed," she said. But those questions were unusual. I leaned back against the pillow. Before the accident, I had been planning my future. I had recently received a promotion, and I was saving for a small house. For the first time, I had enough money to build something that belonged only to me. I had also started keeping an emergency fund because my parents kept asking for money. They always had a reason: a broken appliance, a repair, a bill, something Calloway needed. I had never complained because I thought helping family was what good daughters did. But now I wondered if they had started seeing me as something else. A source of money. I looked at the folder again. My parents had abandoned me while I was unconscious, but their questions had started before they walked away. That meant their decision had not been sudden. Something had been happening behind my back, and I was determined to find out what it was. The more I learned, the harder it became to believe what I was hearing. Mara sat beside my bed with the hospital records open in front of her. She explained that my parents had not reacted with relief when doctors said my condition was improving. Instead, they had argued with the medical staff. My father had demanded to know why I was still being kept under observation. My mother had asked whether my recovery meant I would soon be able to control my own affairs. They had expected something worse. That thought stayed with me long after Mara left. I remembered my father when I was a little girl. I used to believe he could fix anything. When I was scared, I would run to him. I remember my mother brushing my hair before school and telling me that family stayed together no matter what happened. Those memories suddenly felt painful. They belonged to a version of my parents I no longer recognized. Then Mara told me something even more disturbing. My parents had tried to convince doctors that I had always been careless with money. They claimed I could not be trusted to handle important financial decisions. I almost laughed because it was so false. I had managed my own money for years. I had paid bills, built savings, and handled responsibilities they constantly avoided. Mara explained that my parents appeared to be trying to gain more control over my affairs while I was unable to speak for myself. But they had failed. Before my accident, I had prepared legal documents because I had started noticing strange activity involving our family finances. I had named someone outside my family to help protect my interests if I ever became unable to make decisions. His name was Wesley Rowan. Wesley arrived later that afternoon. He was calm and serious. He carried a thin folder and sat beside my bed. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," he said. I asked him what he had found. He opened the folder. Before my accident, I had prepared legal documents because I had started noticing strange activity involving our family finances. I had named someone outside my family to help protect my interests if I ever became unable to make decisions. His name was Wesley Rowan. Wesley arrived later that afternoon. He was calm and serious. He carried a thin folder and sat beside my bed. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," he said. I asked him what he had found. He opened the folder. Before my accident, I had discovered several payments that were supposed to cover my mother's medical expenses. The amounts had never made sense to me. Now, Wesley showed me where some of that money had actually gone. Callaway's business. I stared at the records. There were several payments. Not one, not two, several. I remembered confronting my parents about the missing money before the accident. They had looked me straight in the eyes and denied knowing anything. I had wanted to believe them. Wesley told me he had evidence that could connect my parents to the transfers. My hands began shaking. Suddenly, everything fit together. The questions about my finances, the questions about my insurance, their attempt to control my affairs, their sudden decision to cut me off. They weren't simply tired of taking care of me. They were afraid. They knew that if I recovered, I would start asking questions. And once I found the truth, their entire story would fall apart. Wesley spent the next several days going through every financial record he could find. I watched him work from the hospital room, laying papers across the small table and marking dates with a pen. The more records he checked, the worse the picture became. For years, my parents had asked me for money by using the same excuse. There was always an emergency, a medical bill, a repair, a family expense, something that could not wait. I had never questioned them because I believed they needed me. But Wesley showed me that a large part of the money had eventually moved into Callaway's construction business. Callaway had promised our parents that he would repay everything. He never did. Instead, they came back to me whenever his business needed more money. I felt sick when I realized how many times I had helped them without knowing the truth. Then Wesley showed me something worse. There was a private loan connected to my financial information. I stared at the document. "My name isn't supposed to be there," I whispered. "You didn't approve this," Wesley said. I shook my head. I had never signed for that loan. My parents had apparently used information they already had about my finances to help secure it. Wesley explained that they may have believed I would eventually discover the debt and simply pay it myself. That was when everything inside me went quiet. They had trusted me to rescue them, but they had never trusted me enough to tell me the truth. I thought about the days before my accident. I had started asking more questions. I wanted to know where my money was going. I wanted copies of the bills. I wanted explanations for the strange payments. My parents had become nervous whenever I asked. Now I understood why. Wesley warned me not to confront them yet. "We need proof before you make any accusations," he said. I agreed. That night, I made a decision. I would let my parents believe I still knew nothing. When people asked how I was doing, I said I was confused. I acted tired and weak. I pretended that I could barely remember anything from before the accident. I didn't tell anyone what Wesley had shown me. I didn't tell my parents that I knew about the loan. I didn't tell Calloway that I knew his business had received money that belonged to me. And I didn't tell anyone exactly how much had disappeared. For the first time, keeping quiet did not make me feel powerless. It made me feel safe. I finally understood that I didn't need to prove my worth to my parents. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to keep rescuing Calloway. I only needed to protect myself. So I stayed quiet and watched. If my parents believed their secret was still safe, they would eventually make another mistake. And I would be ready when they did. When I was finally released from the hospital, I thought going home would make me feel normal again. Instead, the moment I opened my apartment door, I knew something was wrong. Several things were missing. A small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother was gone. Some old photographs were missing too. My desk drawers had been opened, and papers that I always kept in one place had been moved around. I called my parents, but neither answered. Then I noticed the lockbox was missing. That box contained old financial statements, property papers, and other documents I had collected over the years. For a few seconds, panic took over. Then I remembered the copies. Before my accident, I had scanned the most important documents and stored them safely. My parents had taken the originals, but they had not taken everything. I sat on the edge of my bed and let out a slow breath. There was something else waiting for me. My landlord, Mr. Hallbrook, called me that evening. He sounded uncomfortable. He told me my parents had contacted him while I was in the hospital. "They said you probably wouldn't be coming back," he explained. I couldn't believe it. They had already tried to make arrangements around my apartment while I was still unconscious. They had expected me to remain helpless. Then Calloway started calling. At first, he sounded worried. He asked how I was feeling and whether I needed anything. I kept my answers short. Then he asked a strange question. "Do you remember anything about the money?" My heart stopped for a moment. I acted confused. "What money?" There was silence on the other end. "Nothing," he finally said. But his voice had changed. A few days later, he called again. This time, he sounded nervous. "Mom and Dad are angry," he said. "You're making everything harder." I didn't respond. That sentence told me more than he probably realized. They had expected me to wake up confused, accept their decision, and move on. They never expected me to investigate. I contacted Wesley and began gathering every record I could still access. Bank statements, receipts, loan documents, payment records, anything connected to the money my parents had requested over the years. Wesley organized everything carefully. Some payments were legitimate family expenses. Others were impossible to explain. The total was far greater than I had imagined. I sat quietly as Wesley showed me the final amount. For years, I had thought I was helping my family survive difficult moments. Now I understood that much of my money had been feeding problems I never created. I had sacrificed vacations, savings, and plans for people who had secretly treated my future like their emergency fund. The worst part was remembering how often they called me selfish whenever I said no. Now I knew why they hated hearing that word. Because every time I said no, they lost access to something they believed belonged to them. I closed the folder. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to destroy their lives. I was going to make sure they could never use me again. That would be my revenge. Several months passed before my parents came to my apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I heard 3 knocks on the door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there with tears running down her face. My father stood behind her with a serious expression. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. They looked like the parents I remembered. But I knew better now. "Can we come inside?" my mother asked. I stepped aside. She immediately started crying. We made mistakes, she said. We were terrified. We thought we were going to lose you. My father nodded. We weren't thinking clearly during your coma. I listened without interrupting. Their words sounded emotional, but none of them explained the documents I'd seen. I finally asked, "Then why were you asking about my accounts?" My mother's crying stopped. My father's face became tense. "We were trying to understand the situation," he said. "Why did you ask about my insurance and retirement account?" Neither answered. That silence told me enough. Then my father finally explained why they had really come. Calloway was in trouble. His construction business had debts from several creditors. Payments were overdue, and people were demanding their money. My parents wanted me to help. They wanted me to refinance my future, use my savings, and possibly sell some of my property. They called it helping the family. I almost smiled. Months earlier, I would have felt guilty hearing that. I would have wondered what I could sacrifice to make things easier for everyone. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "No," I said. My mother stared at me. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not paying Calloway's debts." She called me selfish. My father said family members were supposed to forgive each other. I looked directly at him. Forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone another chance to destroy you. My mother became angry. "You're really going to abandon your own family?" I reached for the folder sitting beside me. "No, you abandoned me." I placed several copies of the financial records on the table. My father picked them up. As he read, the color slowly disappeared from his face. My mother looked over his shoulder. Neither spoke. They finally understood that I knew about the transfers, the loan, and the money that had disappeared. Then Wesley stepped into the room. He had been waiting in the other room because I didn't want to face them alone. He calmly explained that if they continued using my financial information or made false claims about my debts, I would take formal action. My father became furious. "You're choosing an attorney over your own father?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm choosing myself." He threatened to disown me. I looked at him for a long moment. "You already did that." He had nothing left to take from me. For the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. The investigation moved forward quietly. I didn't tell everyone what had happened. I didn't want revenge through embarrassment or angry arguments. I wanted the truth to come out through the records. Wesley worked with the people handling the financial investigation and helped me organize everything I had collected. The records showed that money meant for family expenses had repeatedly been sent to Calloway's construction business. Some transfers were small. Others were large enough to change my entire future. Then we found documents with signatures that were supposed to belong to me. I stared at them for a long time. They looked like my name, but I knew I had never signed them. Wesley explained that this was one of the most important pieces of evidence. When my parents were questioned, they claimed they had misunderstood the paperwork. My father said he thought he was only helping with family finances. My mother said she never intended to cause harm. Calloway gave another explanation. He said he believed the money was a gift, but the records didn't support any of their stories. There were dates, transfers, documents, and messages showing that the money had been moved again and again. Wesley helped me challenge the transactions connected to my name. He also helped protect my remaining assets, so nobody could use them without my permission. For the first time, I felt like I had control over my own life. Then my parents were forced to admit something they had denied for months. They had known Calloway's business was in serious trouble. They had known he couldn't repay the money. They had also hidden those problems from me because they believed I would continue helping if I didn't know the truth. I thought that would be the most painful part. It wasn't. One afternoon, Wesley gave me another document. It was a letter my mother had written before leaving the hospital. I read it slowly. She wrote that I had become too difficult. She said Calloway needed the family's support more than I did. She described him as the child who needed them. I put the letter down. For several minutes, I couldn't move. Suddenly, memories from my childhood came rushing back. Every time Calloway received something first. Every time my problems were called less important. Every time I was told to understand, because I was the responsible one. I finally understood. My parents had never expected me to receive the same treatment as Calloway. They expected me to accept less because they believed I could handle it. That truth hurt more than losing the money. I had spent years wondering what I needed to do to earn their love. Now I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The question was never why they chose Callaway. The question was why I believed I had to compete for love in the first place. I folded my mother's letter and placed it back in the folder. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to choose me. I was choosing myself. Starting over was harder than I expected. For the first time, I had to make every decision without thinking about what my parents wanted. I moved into a smaller home where everything was mine. No one had a key unless I gave it to them. I opened new bank accounts and changed every password connected to my finances. I removed my parents from anything they could access. I also made sure all important documents were kept somewhere they could never reach them. It felt strange at first, then it felt peaceful. I also accepted a new career opportunity. Before the accident, I had spent years building skills that I never gave myself enough credit for. Now I finally had the chance to use them for my own future. My parents didn't like the changes. Sometimes my mother called to apologize. Other times she accused me of destroying the family. My father said I was being cruel. I stopped defending myself. I had spent enough years explaining why I deserved basic respect. Then Callaway asked to meet me alone. We sat at a quiet diner, and he looked exhausted. "Please drop the investigation," he said. I looked at him. "Why?" "Mom and Dad are struggling. They could lose everything." I stayed silent for a moment. Then I said, "I didn't destroy the family." He looked away. "I just stopped allowing them to destroy me." He didn't answer. After a long silence, Callaway finally admitted something I had never expected to hear. He knew. He knew our parents were using my money. He knew the business was being supported by money that wasn't really theirs. He said he always believed I would forgive them. "I thought you were the one person who would never leave," he whispered. Those words hurt, not because I wanted to punish him, but because they proved how differently he had seen me. He hadn't thought of me as a sister who deserved fairness. He had thought of me as someone who would always rescue him. I told him I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life hating him, but I also wasn't going to save him anymore. He nodded quietly. That conversation gave me something I had never received from my parents: closure. For years, I had believed Callaway was simply the favorite child. Now I understood that he had knowingly benefited from the situation. The legal process continued without me turning it into a personal battle. Step by step, the money and financial interests connected to me were restored. I watched my savings grow again. This time, nobody could tell me where my money should go. Nobody could demand that I sacrifice my future for theirs. I had spent years believing that being a good daughter meant giving everything away. Now I understood something different. Being responsible did not mean allowing people to use me. My money finally belonged to me. My choices belonged to me. And after everything my family had taken from me, the most valuable thing I recovered was my future. Almost 2 years had passed since I woke up in that hospital bed. My life looked completely different now. I had rebuilt my savings, bought a modest home, and created a routine that belonged only to me. The people around me respected my boundaries. I no longer felt guilty when I said no, and I no longer felt responsible for fixing problems I didn't create. My parents had slowly lost their influence over my life. They could still call. They could still send letters. But they couldn't control my decisions anymore. Callaway's business eventually collapsed under the debts it had been carrying. He had to start over from almost nothing. At first, my parents blamed me. They said I had ruined Callaway's future. They said I should have helped him, but I refused to listen. There was nothing left for them to take from me. One afternoon, I received a letter from my mother. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. This letter was different. She didn't demand forgiveness. She didn't ask for money. She didn't tell me that families should stay together. She simply admitted the truth. She wrote that she had treated me like a resource instead of a daughter. I stopped reading for a moment. Then I continued. She admitted that Callaway had been protected from consequences for years while I was expected to carry them. She said she had convinced herself that I could handle more because I was responsible. Then came a sentence that hurt the most. She admitted that while I was unconscious, they believed they could cut me off and walk away without ever having to face what they had done. I read that sentence again, then again. I put the letter down and looked around my quiet living room. For years, I had wondered what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I enough? Why did Callaway always seem more important? Why did I have to work so hard for simple approval? But sitting there with my mother's confession in my hands, I finally understood. The little girl who kept trying to earn her parents' love had never been the problem. She had only been trying to survive a family that taught her love had to be earned. The adults around her were the ones who failed. I cried that afternoon, not because I wanted my mother back, not because I suddenly wanted the old family life. I cried because I finally felt sorry for the younger version of myself. She had spent so many years believing she needed to give more, sacrifice more, and forgive more. She never deserved that burden. I folded the letter carefully. I didn't send money. I didn't call my mother. I didn't return to the old arrangement. I simply placed the letter in a drawer and continued with my life. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my family to become the people I needed. I had finally become the person I needed for myself. Nearly 3 years had passed since the night I opened my eyes in that hospital room. Sometimes I still remembered the first thing I saw, the folded note on the table. Back then, I thought waking up alone was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I believed losing my parents meant losing the people I needed most. Now I understood how wrong I had been. That note didn't end my life. It changed it. My parents believed cutting me off would leave me helpless. They thought I would have no choice but to come back, apologize, and accept whatever they demanded. Instead, their decision forced me to see my life clearly. I finally understood how much of it had been controlled by guilt. Every time I helped them, I felt like a good daughter. Every time I refused, I felt selfish. Every time Callaway needed something, I believed I had to sacrifice something of my own. I had confused obligation with love. I wasn't going to make that mistake anymore. I never tried to destroy my parents. I never tried to embarrass them. I never wanted them to suffer simply because they had hurt me. My revenge was different. I became independent. I protected my money. I protected my home. I protected my peace. Most importantly, I stopped begging people to love me. One evening, I opened the drawer where I kept important documents. At the bottom was the original note my mother had left beside my hospital bed. I held it for a long time. Then I placed it inside a small box with the financial records and documents that had helped me uncover the truth. I didn't keep the note because I missed my parents. I kept it because it reminded me of who I had become. That piece of paper had once made me feel unwanted. Now it reminded me that I had survived something I never thought I could survive. My parents had written that they were cutting me off. They believed they were ending their responsibility for me. They never understood that they were also ending my dependence on them. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their permission to build a life. I didn't even need them to regret what they had done. That was the part one never expected. For years, I thought revenge meant making someone feel the pain they caused. But I learned something better. Sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming so peaceful and strong that the people who betrayed you no longer control your happiness. My family thought I would wake up broken. They thought I would wake up desperate for them. Instead, I woke up with a chance to become someone new. I was still alone, Hartley, but I was no longer the daughter who lived for her family's approval. I was a woman who finally understood her own worth. They left me while I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was free.